Okay. Hey, friends. Welcome back to the Peace Now podcast. I am very lucky today to be talking to my new friend, Ramsey Dukes. How are you doing today, Ramsey?
Fine, thanks.
Thanks so much for being on with us today. We've been doing this traditional question, and I wanted to run it past you, this traditional first question, which what has been absorbing you in your life recently? Like, what's been engaging you and been interesting to you recently?
Well, I had a lot of pain around about August last year, and uh, yeah, really severe back pain,
Hmm.
and I couldn't find anything to cure it. I went to a doctor, I had injections, I had acupuncture, I went to physiotherapists, and they treated me, and each time it sort of was a bit better the next day, but it went bad again. And
Hmm.
then one Sunday I woke up and the pain seemed to have gone. Not
Oh.
completely. I could still feel a slight discomfort, but I thought that's marvelous, fantastic.
Mhm.
So I got up and found I couldn't walk. My
Oh.
legs were like jelly. And so um, I thought possibly the nerves that had been transmitting the pain have broken. That's why I can't feel the pain. So I had a scan. And when I went to the hospital to find the results of the scan, the surgeon said, "Don't go home, straight to hospital bed. You
Hmm.
could be paraplegic unless I operate as soon as I can. You've got to be on your back." So I had sort of weeks of being on my back tied down, thinking a lot about my life and the patterns of it and everything. And one of the thoughts I had, which was quite interesting, I think, was that uh, like it was hell for me to be forced to sit on my back, no view out of the window, no sunshine, anything like that for day after day, and I wasn't allowed to do any movements without nurses sort of standing by and helping me. Um, and this was let me think, November, yeah. And I thought, on the one hand, I thought this is hell.
Hmm.
The other thought, I thought, well, hang on, there are people in Ukraine probably right now crawling out of a bomb hole with an arm and a leg missing, you
Hmm.
know, not knowing if their friends have lived. How the hell can I say that I'm suffering hell?
Hmm.
Um, it was a very confusing thought. And then I remembered years ago when I was teaching, one of my pupils, this was in the 19, around about 1970, no, it was earlier than that, 68, I think. One of my pupils was having visions,
Hmm.
said, "I'm having visions of heaven and hell." And he said, um, at present, the Vietnam War is going on. And part of me says, what right have I got to say that I'm suffering hell when there's a Vietnam War going on? Um, People will say, but you're a rich, he was an aristocrat, lord something rather than that. You're rich, you're a lord, that sort of thing. You've got no right to say you're suffering hell. And he said, but I think actually everyone has their own hell. And to judge people by trying to compare the level of pain with someone else is not realistic. And I came up with this idea that a spoonful of water is just as full as a bucket full of water.
Hmm.
Okay, you could say there isn't much water in it, but if it's full, it's full.
Hmm.
And um, the example I thought of is if you could take the opposite extremes, if you take a rich, spoilt um, daughter of a billionaire film star who's having a bit of bad love luck and is saying, "I'm in hell, I'm in misery," and that sort of thing. And you put the same comparison. Well, what about people, being bombed out in Ukraine? How could you say you're in hell? Uh, she's in her own hell. Now, the test I decided, a thought experiment to say if this is really is valid, is to give each of those two people a suicide pill. Just swallow this, and it'll be the end of your troubles. who would take it first? And I reckon the rich, spoilt girl would take it. Um, but the man crawling out of the pit with his arm blown off wouldn't, because he's got such a fighting survival instinct, and he thinks of the value, he's fighting for his country, is that sort of thing. So although on one level, physically, you can't really compare the levels of pain, each in their own way are in hell.
Mm.
And so that's how I thought about me when I was in the hospital, that this is hell to me, to be held down and that type of thing. Um, but I know that in terms of fear physical pain, it's nothing. I've got people looking after me, trained people, and that sort of thing, looking after my welfare. What can I complain about? So this is a sort of thing that has been very much in my mind
Mm.
with this operation. Uh,
Y- Yeah, and so this experience with your health, and yeah, what a scary thing, losing, the spine. It's such a visceral injury, and walking, and then pain.
mm,
Obviously, like it's a constant reminder that something's not going well.
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
and you entered hell, um,
mm,
a hell for you, your personal hell, and
yeah.
it's a very evocative thought experiment. Like you were filled up with, it was like as much as you could bear. And that's kind of what your thought experiment is about. It's about hell is when we're pushed past what we can bear. And
Mm,
so it's not like it's like qualitative. It's more of a qualitative hell. And
yeah,
for the rich
that's it,
air,
I think. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. So to say that, oh, I know someone who's suffering worse than you, therefore you got no right to complain. That actually is that sort of comparison, the objective comparison, really doesn't work. It's how subjectively you're feeling that defines your heaven or your hell. Mm,
yeah. And you have, this is reminding me of in your name, you have Ram. This starts at RAM. And I think of another great teacher from the 60s, you get Ram Dass.
mm,
And yeah, and he like had a stroke. I don't know if you followed that. He had a stroke later in his life, and that was very frustrating for him and a hellish experience. And
mm,
he wrote a book. I think it was called Grist for the Mill. Tried to make it a spiritual experience.
mm,
So it's reminding me of that. Like, so what do you think this hell? Like, so in the Christian tradition, it's about a punishment.
mm,
Um, you seem to be doing something else with it. Like,
yeah.
what do you make of hell? Like, is there a purpose to it for you? Is it just an opportunity? Is it a fate that we're all going
Mm,
towards? Like, what do you think of hell
yeah.
in your worldview?
Well, sort of to have a simplified view, what is our purpose here on Earth, or in
Yes.
the universe, I should say? Um, and the nearest thing I can come to is that the universe needs to experience itself,
Hmm.
and as conscious beings, we are giving the universe an experience of itself. Um, and Now, I tend to think in terms of karma.
Hmm.
Now, Um, there's an idea about karma which I've seen in the press. People
Hmm.
sort of saying, "Oh, karma, yes. If you've had a good life now and you haven't been good to other people, then you'll be punished in the next life by suffering." Now, I'm not actually an expert on Buddhism, but I don't think that's quite right. And I can think of the example: if you had a champion athlete, Olympic gold medalist or something, um, and uh, he dies young at the height of his career. Now, according to that sort of thing, his next life he should be a handicapped
Hmm.
because um, as a punishment for not having done enough to help handicapped people. But the way I see it is that being handicapped is one of life's experiences, and if you don't actually hurt yourself and have it happen as a kid, a broken leg or something, um, old age you'll find yourself becoming very handicapped, as I find. So it's part of the experience of being a human. Now, if that guy was a champion athlete and all that, you know, he wasn't having that experience.
Mm.
So he might be handicapped in the next life. But if he actually showed real empathy with handicapped people, maybe when he got a bit older, he became a coach for paraplegic, Paralympic people, something like that. In other words, he really put himself into understanding and empathizing with handicapped people. Then in my thing, in his next life, he had less likely to be handicapped because although he hadn't experienced it directly himself, with empathy in that, he'd actually absorbed some of that experience of being a human being. So I tend to, my own version of or vision of uh, karma is it's a balancing out. You know, if you're stinking rich in one life and you don't do anything to help poor people and you just ignore them, pretend they don't exist, then I would say you're likely to be broke in the next life, not as a punishment, but simply because you haven't experienced the fullness of human existence, which does include want and poverty and things like that. And so, again, the same thing that applies. If you have been stinking rich, but you've done an awful lot to help poor people, there'll be less need for you to be poor in the next life because you have vicariously sort of experienced poverty through other people and being empathetic and trying to help and everything like that. So, yeah, that's it. I so these ups and downs, I think, are part of the richness of life. Um, and so, you know, people who have tremendous success, I, I think if you read their autobiographies, they have tremendous downers too.
Yeah.
You know, it can be either the success goes stale on them and they think, what am I really doing with my life? Is this really what I wanted? Or else their wonderful business empire collapses and they have to start again. So to me, that's all sort of actually the grist for the mill. It's all it's the fullness of experience, and so that actually justifies that sort of bit of traditional wisdom. When you have a bad experience, what can I learn from it? How can I grow from this? Rather
Yeah.
than wallowing in it and being miserable. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so in the Ramsey Duke's theory of karma, hell it's less of a punishment and more of an opportunity for the universe experiencing itself. Um,
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
mhm.
Um,
And I'm thinking too, oh, I'm sorry, my fault.
yeah, the sort of the fullness of life. Um, the pleasures, the pleasures, the pains, and everything. And I think when people look back on their lives, very often that becomes more obvious. You know, I think I've read things like this. Say a very successful businessman, absolute example to anyone, and you say, "What's the most important thing happened in your life?" Very often they come up with something quite banal, like, "Well, when I was a kid, I tried to make a soapbox cart, and I made a hell of a mess up of it, and I felt terrible."
Mm.
And that affected the whole way I did business forevermore. That in other words, they can look back and see what they thought was an absolute low point. Actually, it was a vital part of their makeup. They learned something very important. And I think there's a hell of a lot of life stories when people are being very honest. They come up with things like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I'm a great admirer, I'm American. I'm a great admirer of Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh
And
yes.
a lot of people, when we think of, that the life story is,
Mm,
the Lincoln Memorial and that big speech, and there's 100,000 people. And it's just
mm,
like, I have a dream,
mm,
this crowning moment. And he's a Leo. And I think that was in the middle of Leo season. So it's at the peak. But if you look
mm,
at his career, it's mostly defined by jail, being shame, being
mm,
completely
mm,
degraded and shamed and
Mm.
shut down, and failure. It's
Yeah.
defined mostly by failure. And there's a kind of resilience. And so there's this like interesting, yeah, I think he experienced a very big spectrum. And it, like in the telling of it, it tends the glorious tends to be recounted. But I do like think that it's like a be careful what you ask for type thing. Cause I think, there's probably with those kind of peaks, it
Mm.
necessarily invokes the opposite.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I'm intrigued by this. I think it's an empowering vision of hell because it gives us something to do there. It's like
Mm.
fully experiencing that. Like if you can like really be
Yeah.
with it. Um, yeah, I think it's a powerful from a
It
empowering
is.
standpoint. Yeah.
You mentioned Martin Luther King. Of course, our South African version
Right.
is Nelson Mandela,
Right.
who was identified as a terrorist and put on a sort of, he was in solitary confinement, I think, a lot of the time, but he was on this island, which was a prison island, I suppose equivalent of Alcatraz or something, called Robben Island, and having to break rocks and things like that. And he was a very intelligent man. He was a lawyer, he studied law. But I think with a few friends, they educated themselves while they were there. Um, Now, he came out as a great hero, and he was an inspiration to the world. Sort of people like the Dalai Lama and everyone sort of said, and he was a very very brilliant leader to start with. And I the question I wanted to put to him, I think I can't remember, was it sort of 7 years, 9 years in prison or something like that? Was, do you think that every president of every country, part of the condition should be that they had 9 years in jail before they become president? Because it was clear that I mean, he was a sort of, to some extent, a wild young man. He was an angry young man early on, but he came out so incredibly wise because he had so much time to think things over and to sort of study his captors. You know, he was very good. He knew what to say to Afrikaners who were his prison ward, that because he communicated with them all that time and sort of learnt their ways. And
Mm.
there's a story, a movie they made, um, where it showed that when he came out, it was this rugby World Cup, and rugby was absolutely associated with the white Afrikaners. You know, black people didn't have any interest in that. But he particularly made a point of, he spoke to the captain, uh, that you must go to the townships and teach the young black people rugby and all that, so that they actually won the World Cup, the whole country was united, celebrating. None of this sort of, oh, it's a white man's game, we're not interested in that. And so that was very inspirational thinking, because he knew the mind of the Afrikaners, and
Mm.
that a black president was going to encourage rugby was sort of, their hearts opened up to him, and
Yeah.
things like that. All the sort of things he learned through those years of exile, or not, next years of imprisonment.
Okay, I'm gonna try to make a leap here, a link between what we're talking about and see how it works. And it's just an experiment. So you're talking about kind of unification. So through South Africa, more the kind of political, having the political talk. So and then so unification. You mentioned empathy,
Mm,
with your theory of karma, and you mentioned this experience you're having with pain, um, and this grist for the mill idea. And then you mentioned hell. And okay,
mm,
so those are things we're talking about. It's like a constellation. And then
mm.
I found your work originally, and it changed my life, I have to admit. Your book, I don't know how much you are remember this or connected with this, but you wrote a book called Ramsey Duke's Little Book of Demons.
Yes.
Yes.
Uncle Ramses, Uncle
Uncle
Ramses.
Ramsey's Uncle Ramsey's Little Book of Demons. which was the
Mm.
first thing I read of yours. And I was at the time working with a lot of addiction issues, and
Mm.
addiction was the demon,
Oh, yeah.
and it was
Mm.
evil, and I hated it.
Mm.
And then this book was a very interesting idea of like, hey, let's do some democracy. And I remember you changed it from exorcism to democracy. That was like part of the framing in that text. Um,
Yes, yes.
and I'm thinking now, so I work as a therapist now. And actually, it's interesting because one of the things I work with is pain that has no explanation, medically
Mm.
unexplained pain, and we have to work
Mm.
with it on a. And I use your work a lot, like at least the framing of like what is this pain? Like let's look at it as a demon,
Mm.
and like because it doesn't have a like unlike you, you're able to go in and they're able to find a source, but people go in, they have these headaches. It's like
Mm.
there's no cause to this. Sorry, go home.
Mm.
Here's some aspirin,
Mm.
and it doesn't go away. And one of the things we work with is it might be trauma or some kind of stress, some unconscious
Mm.
stress might be causing it. But anyways,
Mm.
what do you remember about this book, Uncle Ramsey's Little Book of Demons? Um, do you see any connections in what we're talking about to it? And maybe the magic thing too. Just talk a little bit about the
Yes,
magic
yes.
thing.
Well, one of the things that not everyone gets about the Middle Book of Demons, um, people love to find a formula or a mechanism for something. I mean, I had that when I was teaching mathematics. You try to get people to understand the whole principle of solving quadratic equations or something like that, and what's behind it. And they say, "Can't you just give us the formula? And then we'll put the values in and we can do it." And I said, "No, I'm actually trying to teach you to think a certain way." Now, the some people, I think, when they read that book, they're a bit frustrated because I didn't sort of end each chapter with 3 points that you must follow to get rid of your demon, 10 steps towards removing your demon, something like that. Because what I was talking about a lot was that you see in scientific and medical ideas, and I suppose psychological ideas, uh, are a bit mechanistic. You know, if you could find the hormone which is causing your problem and find something which dampens it, then you cure it. Um, but if you have this concept of demons as sort of living entities, um, parasitic maybe, but they are living entities, you've got this problem. If you address it as if it was a conscious being, you're tackling it very differently. And I start with a very naive thing of teaching the office copywriter, office copying machine, saying, how do I actually behave towards it?
Hmm.
And treat it as though am I being polite towards it when I'm in a hurry? Um, it's so, and I gave one example, which I think was rather telling. Um, uh, you found your demon and you read my book. And so, right, I'm now going to do these steps to sort of get rid of it. And it doesn't work. I say, why? It says, because while you were reading the book, the demon was reading the book too. Now, how would you feel if you had your relationship with your lover and she was getting really troublesome? And you bought a book which said how to deal with difficult people.
Yeah.
Okay, so next time you meet, you say all the right things, sort of how are you feeling, love, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and she thinks, oh God, what's happened to him? He's amazing. Then she comes into your bedroom and finds the book, How to Deal with Difficult People. And she looks and sees you've just been running a formula through her, you see. And I said, so this sort of trying to find the formula, uh, people really look for that. They really want that. But I'm talking about actually tackling your problem as if it was, okay, perhaps not a very nice person in your life, but a person who has got a role in your life. What is it actually? What is its role? What does it want? Um, uh, yeah, so it's sort of bringing it to life. And there's a interesting sort of corollary to that. The chaos magic thing of having a servitor.
Hmm.
You invent a spirit, create a spirit to serve you. I was talking about that with on some interview some years back. Uh, And I said that I find I'm getting very absent-minded and forgetful. So I created a butler servitor, a butler who'd remind me what to do. And, I say, Jeeves, don't let me put my keys down anywhere and not be able to find them. Make sure I always hang them on the key hook. And sure enough, I walk past and I get remember, oh, I'm just hanging the keys on the key hook. But the important thing was I would say thank you to that spirit.
Mm,
The people I was talking to said, oh, yes, it's a new thing, life hacking. Uh, what you're doing is called life hacking. So what people will do is like if they if they forget to go running in the morning, they'll put out their running shoes and say, "Remind me to go running in the morning."
mhm,
And I said, and she said, it's a bit of a craze now. Everyone's talking about life hacking. And I said, that's great, but I bet they don't do it for very long because my argument was if um, your shoes have reminded you to go running, you should thank them.
mm.
Otherwise, would you go on reminding someone if he never thanked you?
Yeah, no.
Treat it as though they mattered. Thank them. And so that's a start. But I would say go a bit further than that. When you put your shoes away to remind you, say, "Hey, shoes, yeah, I'm really looking forward to running with you tomorrow morning. It's going to be great, isn't it? So make sure you remind me." Uh, you're sort of you know, if you do that, I say you're forming a real relationship with your shoes, and it's going to work much better. Whereas if you just say, "Remind me to run," and then they remind you to run, you'll give up after a while. It's boring, you won't get real cooperation. So that was the sort of thing I was really wanting to emphasize. If you start bringing the world to life, you know, allow things to have real meaning. Um, this demon isn't just like a cold virus, you've got to get rid of it. It's something it's participating in your life, um, and find out why.
Mm.
Uh, and once you find out why, you might decide, well, okay, now I want to get rid of it. But at least you'll do that with more understanding. You would have, and I think this is something that you noted. I looked back at old books of exorcism, which said sort of damned spirit, go down to hell, or I'll call the might of Jesus Christ Almighty to blast you, and this sort of thing. And I said, uh, we don't really deal with our criminals like that anymore. We try to rehabilitate them or whatever, or at least speak to them or understand them. And I think the same thing should apply to the demons in our lives. So again, it's a sort of thing of I saw it as a more modern approach, a more understanding approach. And from my experience of it, it was a better approach. It worked better.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So there's this insight. So you notice that post the publication of the book, there's one of the frustrations with some people is they want like the formula, kind of like with math. And
Mm,
the real point that I'm hearing from the book is to like initiate us into this way of relating to the world more
mm,
relationally, like having a relationship with the world and
mm,
giving and recognizing, maybe not giving, but that could be an interesting thing we talk about. Is it a recognition of agency in the world
mm,
or more of a kind of spell? That's like a very interesting question. Because yeah, but maybe before we get into that kind of dialogue, how did this happen for you? Like, what inspired this book basically? Like, can you remember like what initiated you into this like worldview?
mm. Um, yes, yeah. To some extent, it was reading things like Goetic literature and all that, um, and reading these great sort of damned spirit invocations, everything. Uh, Another thing was maybe that I'd had a child. My girlfriend became pregnant. We had a
Hmm.
son, and dealing with a baby, particularly if it's your own baby,
Hmm.
what a bloody nuisance children can be
Yeah,
to a sort of
demonic.
stuffy old man like me,
Yeah.
Um, and and I used to think of this example. You see, people would say, "Oh, I've discovered my demon. How do I get rid of it?" And I said, "Well, if the demon was your little child, and I said, 'Oh, don't worry, I'll get rid of it,' you'd be horrified, you know, because for all the awfulness of this little brat, you relate to him, sort of. So someone who says, 'Don't worry, won't worry, I'll get rid of it,' is horrifying. And yet people will do that for their demon. And the demon may well have been something their oldest friend. I was rather lonely as a child because I was the youngest child. I'd be sent up to bed while I'd hear people partying downstairs. Oh, little Lionel goes to bed, we'll get rid of him. And so I remember sort of tearful times,
Hmm.
crying. Here am I left here. I'm not part of all the fun and all that sort of thing. So that was like a demon who um, I got to know as a child. So later in life, when someone might be having a fantastic party and I wasn't invited, that same sorrow came over me, and I realized that I'm still thinking of the thing I did as a little child. It's the same misery. I could cry, whereas as an adult, I could do something about it. I could go around and crash the party or invite myself in or something. But I fell back into that state of deep sadness and sort of inadequacy and everything.
Hmm.
Um, now, so uh, I would want to get rid of that state, but I'd be getting rid of something that's like my oldest friend.
Hmm.
Because when I was alone in that room, was I really alone? No, I had my misery. I was living my misery. It's sort of, here we go again. Yes, it's sad, isn't it? Everything. It's like my oldest friend, one I didn't particularly like, but he stuck with me through all those bad times. And here I'm trying to get rid of it. Can I do better than that? It's yeah. So very often this sort of the demon, if you look back, might have been with you for quite a while. And it might have been feeling miserable is one of the things you do when things are bad. Well, that feeling in your chest of misery, it's like it's been your companion all this time. It's the
Hmm.
person you talk to. I'm feeling terrible, something like that. And now you just want to get rid of it. So, so it's yeah, that's strange. Just felt it needed a new way of looking at it, a new approach, and that
Hmm.
really was sort of inspired the book.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when you mentioned like me mechanistic thinking, this seems
Mm,
so dominant, in at least in my culture in the US. And
mm.
yeah, feelings are oftentimes seen as illnesses.
Yes. Well, I just say the mechanistic thinking, you see, is what society respects and advocates, you
Hmm.
know. But one of the things I said in my book is actually we do have a strong instinct to personify that. And um, you know, I've known many people who would give their car a name
Hmm.
and would talk to it as they drive along. You know, come on, Samantha, you
Come
haven't run
on.
out of petrol yet. Keep going, Samantha. You see, um, and uh, yes, and sort of talking to things. You wouldn't want to be seen doing that to anyone else. They think you're a nutter or something. But it's quite a strong instinct, actually, to personify and form a sort of relationship or talk to it. But people just don't like to admit it. And so I said, do it. It's another way of looking at. Um, if the car's misbehaving, okay, think could it be, lack of petrol? Could it be a block carburetor? All those sort of things. But also, have I been treating it with respect?
Hmm.
You know, no, I've been a bit slow at putting the oil in, things like that. Or I let the brakes fade quite a bit before I did. Um, I haven't been a very good partner to the car. Now I'm getting the feedback. It's sort of uh, it's more natural to people than they like to admit, I think. And so I
Yeah.
say, rather than saying, oh, no, no, I mustn't be silly and personify, actually do it better, you know, really. form a relationship.
I wanted to ask you, that makes so much sense because what I'm hearing, what I admire about your work is it's very holistic and inclusive,
Mm.
like both and. It's like, yeah, do the medical model and do the care, like, and do the magic model. Why not both?
Mm.
What uh I wanted to ask you how, maybe this is a question about chaos magic as well, is like faith almost. Like in I think faith takes has a lot of juice to it, Like sometimes just, and I think that's one reason that people don't want to uh embrace something like chaos magic, because it's like if I don't have faith in the medical system, like I lose the power of placebo, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so like I wonder if in your work you've been able to, how you've been able to like be pluralistic while still, I don't know, like tapping the power of faith, if that makes sense, or like really immersing
Yeah.
yourself in the world. Because you kind of have to, I've noticed like with the servitor thing, like for you, it's very natural to like fully believe it.
Mm.
And I think that might be an obstacle for some of us, like to actually like be a grounded modern human being and talk to demons.
Mm.
How have you navigated that tension?
Yeah. Well, take the thing of the servitor.
Mhm,
You see, when you're very, um, I think I can't remember, there was another book where I did the meditation, which is really what people now call mindfulness.
mhm.
That being really awake to the world, observing, properly observing, seeing everything. Now, actually, the rational thing in society actually tells you what you're not supposed to see.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
so um, I think it's a famous Shakespeare thing about someone sort of saying, "Oh, look at that cloud; it's a camel, isn't it?" The other person said, "No, I think it's something or other." And there's this idea that there's a word for it. And I don't, what is that word? Is it apophenia? I don't know.
Mhm.
Which says the human brain, one marvelous human brain, does have certain sort of inherited, evolved weaknesses, and one of them is the seeing meaning where there isn't any. So some people will see faces in clouds, or Jesus Christ on a piece of toast, and all these sort of funny things, and that's a sort of a defect of the human brain. And I would say, and I've done this, is it really a defect? It's rather wonderful to see faces in clouds, isn't it?
Mm.
And I didn't do that very much. But so I started looking for faces in clouds. I got quite good at it. Oh, look, there's a face there. Oh, a grumpy old man there. There's a demon there. I became good at it. And then I began to see faces everywhere. I saw them in nature, bush. I'd see like little gnomes looking out, things like that. And did it send me round the bend? Did it make me crazy? Was I dragged off to a loony asylum? No, life was rather rich. I so
Mm.
enjoyed the company. I could go for a walk in the woods and feel that I've, hi, all these friends around me. It's rather nice.
Mm.
And um, I didn't go balmy. I didn't go over the edge. So with things, some of these things are magic. It's if you're very awake and what you really see. So take the example of the servitor, the butler, uh, or talking to your shoes to remind you. It works once or twice, and that's rather wonderful. If you actually observe what happens, I did remember first time I remembered to go for a run. Um, now the thing is that people, uh, is to say they don't follow it up, and so it dies out, and they give it up after a week. Awful lot of these people start things, and then a month later they've dropped them. But that's part of it. When you find some little magical thing works, and you really stop your brain from saying, "Oh, I think must have been a coincidence," or "It can't have worked that quickly," or whatever. If you actually allow it as if it was sending a message to you,
Mm.
um, thank you and thank it. Thank you for working. That was great. Let's do it again. Um, uh, yeah, you're helping to because a lot of this prejudice against magic is what we're told. you know, oh, um, some people find it very frightening. Plenty of stories of people. Have you ever had a magical experience? Yeah, I once had a dream about a car crash. And the next day it happened to a friend of mine. After that, I had nothing more to do with magic. It was scary.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
uh, that sort of thing, turning off the tap. Whereas if you say, well, actually, you can keep that tap open, just be more conscious, work with it, you know, really notice what happens, what doesn't happen, and learn from it. And yeah, so uh, going back to what you were saying, you see, the chaos magic thing, Pete Carroll, is you play with beliefs, become a fundamentalist Christian for a few days, you know, really look at the world in that way, and you'll see plenty of evidence. The evidence will pile up. This really is how things are. But the difference is you made a conscious choice to try that belief. So even if it works tremendously well and it seems to explain everything, it doesn't mean you have to say, now I've found the truth. This is what's really true. All the other things were false. Um, what you've done is you've tried an experiment that seemed to work. So what do you learn? You learn to respect a bit more the people who are fundamentalist Christians and think it's absolute truth. Because you can say, actually, when I tried it, it did feel very real. It became very real. But at least I knew it was my choice. And so I don't go around telling everyone else that they're all wrong, that I've discovered the truth. I just found something that worked. Now, I've since decided that I find Buddhism works better for me, and that's the one I'm choosing. You know,
Mm.
uh, so um, chaos magic did have this thing of sort of presenting you with a toolkit, and you could find which tools you like working with, which one suited you, and you didn't feel that you had to go around telling everyone else they were wrong because you found Buddhism is better than Christianity. Therefore, everyone should be a Buddhist. You could admit that Buddhism works really well for me. My heart is in it, but I do understand that for some people, there's Christianity is what
Mm.
their heart is in. It's just a pity they go around telling everyone else that they've got to think the same thing because it works for them.
Mm.
Yeah. Mm,
It's so interesting. Yeah, so the with like the belief shifting,
mm,
these experiments allowing us to, which is kind of profound because I think a lot of history has been about being given and conditioned into a worldview, right? Like
mm,
I that's just my hypothesis, looking around the world, seeing, most people seem to take on the cultures they're given. That makes sense. And we're
mm.
conditioned into,
Yeah.
and chaos magic is kind of giving you a space to explore and take on different things. Do you see it as like, I'm curious, like I'm wondering like what is, and maybe we don't need to know this, but is the chaos magic and the shifting, is that like a worldview or is it more like a tool to find a more preferable worldview?
Mm.
That's kind of like my
Yeah.
question.
Yes, I think that I could say that it's a sort of transition
Mm,
because for centuries, and I don't know how, actually, if you're a real historian, you might know that it hasn't always been so. But certainly since the Victorian times, um, there's been or perhaps I think it might be from the Enlightenment, the idea that there is a truth. I think the Enlightenment came from the Protestant thing,
mm-hmm,
where um, Catholicism was rather magical. You know, you've got these prayers which you don't actually understand them because they're in Latin, but they're like beautiful. They're like music, the plain song and that sort of thing. And Protestantism said, no, that's mumbo jumbo. Um, what you want is the truth, and there is one truth, and that's the Bible. So we won't have it in Latin. That's ridiculous. People don't understand it. You have it translated into your own language. Bible translated to English. Now you're holding in your hands the truth. Um, and it's what if someone believes differently? Well, because they're wrong, because this is the word of God. Now that idea that there's one truth and it's all written down really, to me, inspired the scientific revolution because science was finding out that one truth. Now, uh, the sort of the growth thing in religion that people point to is towards monotheism. You know,
Mm.
all these pagans and primitives, they worshipped everything, you know, the gods here, gods there, and all that sort of thing. Now we boiled it down. God and devil, no, that's Manichaean. Now we know there's just the one truth, the one God.
Yeah.
Now, science actually took that a step further. Science said you've got God and you've got matter. That's a duality. We say matter is the one truth. There isn't a God. And so if you study matter, you'll find the truth.
Mm.
So in a way that took the sort of religious search for the truth to the limit. Only one truth, and that's matter. So if you want to find out the truth of it, you study matter
Yeah.
in a laboratory, you know, that sort of thing, like that. Now, so that by the time I was born, certainly, was this idea of a worldview.
Hmm.
What is the truth? Everyone must know
Mm.
what the true world is, and other people could be mistaken, or that sort of thing, and you can perhaps explain it away in terms of hormones or their education or something like that. You know, but you know there is this one truth which you want to find. Now, um, the way I see it uh, is not so much that chaos magic presented a new, updated truth, but rather it allowed you to question the unity of truth. Um, and suggested tools for playing with it. Um, so uh, in that way, I see it as a bit transitional. You know, we've gone from centuries of really sure that there must be one truth. What is it? To uh, saying, what is truth? You know, um, I can be sure of effectiveness. I'm sure some things work and other things don't. But does that mean they're true? I
Mm.
don't know. Um, you know, if I decide to try homeopathy and it works brilliantly. And then a friend says, haven't you read those papers? You know, they've tested homeopathic medicine with a double blind test and it didn't work. It was no better than a placebo. So do I say, oh, perhaps I wasn't cured then? You know, I
Yeah.
can't have been cured. Or do you say, it worked for me? You know, I'm very happy with the results I got, that sort of thing. Um, the fact that it didn't work for other people, well, that's sad for them because it worked nicely for me, you know. Um, so I feel we're in that sort of state present. And I think it has quite a lot to do with the sort of people getting very worried about post-truth society.
Mm.
You know, how can people believe these crazy things and all that? Well, um, I think a lot of, I think quite a lot of people who are being described as crazy, like the flat Earth people. Now, I'm sure there are some who really have convinced themselves the earth is flat. But I think a lot of people go into a thing like that with tongue in cheek. Um, when I was at university, Thomas Young, a very famous scientist, was one of our, you know, ancestors in the school. Thomas Young, and there was a Thomas Young Society,
Mm.
and they took everything very seriously. Um, but they were taking the piss out of science. You know, like units of measurements. The unit of time was something like the period of oscillation of Thomas Young's old tobacco pot, you know, when it wobbled. So they sort of, this is a unit, one Thomas Young or something like that. And then they sort of worked out lengths and things like that. They, with all the pomposity of a scientific institution, they were doing all this science on these sort of crazy things. Now, if um, I don't think anyone would say those people in Emmanuel College were crazy. They're lunatics. They should be shut up. They
Mhm.
understand it in that way. But I'm sure a lot of the people who go in for the Flat Earth Society actually find it's enormous fun to think up reasons to prove it's a flat Earth, and they make friends in that way. Oh, I've discovered another reason why the Earth is flat. Have you seen the shadow on the moon? Well, it's obviously the shadow of a flat disk. Oh wow, yeah, that's it. So, um, I think people are playing around a lot,
Yeah.
and the media are getting very het up, seeing this as a great surge of insanity.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas I would say it's a trickle of insanity, because some people do go balmy, when they lose their footing. But yeah, I think we're in that sort of state of flux at present, um, and it'd be interesting to see, where it takes us. Probably won't live to find out. But, you will.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be interesting. And it's interesting, like the dogma point. Well, yeah, like because like especially with our flat Earth friends, like I basically dogmatically believe in the institutions. Like I don't know
Mm,
anything about geology, or it's just not something I've looked into. So when I listen to these things, the function of believing in flat Earth means you immerse yourself in this field that a lot of people don't really talk about, and you do have even if it's like a minority view or a silly
mm,
view, it's kind of a fun way to explore a field that's just kind of shut down for most people.
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
so the point about, well, I kind of wanted to connect to, like, I like your view of chaos magic because there's a term like immanent critique that I like. It's a fancy term, but it's like I think the mechanistic view gets its authority. Like you're talking about effectiveness, right?
Mm,
A lot, and the reason, in the Enlightenment, they're saying, oh, this is better is because if you talk to Halley's Comet, if you remote view Halley's Comet and try to
mm.
predict with a prophecy when it will come, you'll, it,
Yeah.
you'll probably be more successful, effective using the scientific method to observe Halley's Comet, and it's probably more effective over time. That's just my hypothesis to predict
Mm,
when comets will come using the scientific method. And so they're like, you fools, stop remote viewing the comet,
mm,
just do science. The problem with that is, I think, from my worldview, is exactly what you said with the demons. Is Halley's Comet doesn't, in its relationship, the observation of it isn't saying, well, I don't want to be seen by you, so I'm going to
mm,
fly out of the orbit. And
mm,
it doesn't, that particular being
mm,
works very naturalistically and it likes it has a routine, let's just say that
mm,
it's a very
mm,
routine driven
yeah.
person or being,
Mm,
whereas especially in addiction or something like that, or
mm,
and definitely people, I'm kind of rambling, but it's like imagine an engineering thing that works really well is that
mm,
if you want to reduce people falling downstairs,
mm,
you can make various changes. You can add a railing. You can add a texture that makes it slip resistant. But imagine every time you did that, the stair responded and
mm,
said, "Oh, I'm going to make myself steeper, or something like
mm,
that." If it's learning. So, anyways, what I'm trying to say is things that learn and
mm,
react, they don't
mm,
tend to respond to naturalistic methods as well,
mm,
and actually will incorporate that. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is uh, chaos theory and complexity theory tries to take this into account. Which so I think like chaos magic is very interesting for that reason. I think it's very effective in systems that are based on learning and change and aren't
Mm.
as naturalistic. And I think it's just dogmatic to think that something like physics necessarily applies to systems that learn and adapt.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, just thinking of that example of, you know, you could do the science and you could predict exactly when that comet's going to come.
Yeah,
Um, the science that you do is a discipline, follows certain rules. And when you look to see exactly what moment it's going to come, you're working still within that discipline. So, in other words, you did science to get a result, which is seen in scientific terms. Now, the person who perhaps did, say, a magical thing of sort of identifying with a comment and talking to it and all that, um, may not do any better than if he'd done the scientific thing, if he was only looking at scientific results. But maybe that person learnt other things which
yeah,
science didn't even bother to look at.
yeah.
Maybe, uh, yeah, maybe had his comments said, I'm getting a bit pissed up with you, humanity. They're behaving badly. I'm going to bring a bit of a disaster next time I appear. Comets are supposed to do that, aren't they? And then show there is a bit of a world disaster when the comet comes. And so, but the scientists wouldn't even notice that. They say, no, it's nothing to do with the comet.
The causality they're
Yeah,
missing.
because yes, that's it. Because for them, that wasn't in the parameters they were studying. It was about when it comes back. Um, but psychologically, even psychologically, which is after all a science, the pundits might say the world was on tenterhooks. There was huge tension, and traditionally, people believe that comets cause bad problems, and so sort of the psychological movement took over and caused a crisis. So that's a halfway thing. So it's halfway to magic. They're actually admitting that human beings do more than just make measurements. Yeah. So that uh, I don't know. I think that answers one of your points anyway. About um, the relationship between looking at things scientifically. Um, I've written an article for a sort of anthology of chaos magic, and I talk a lot about this thing about how when you think you're experiencing something, actually the brain is modeling that in a virtual reality. And I've talked about this on some of my channels things. Um, I said that, uh, yeah, I give the example of, you know, a young man having woman troubles, and like in Diane Fortune's novel, what he does, he stays up all night talking to the full moon, on a beach with there's over the sea, there's the full moon. Spends the whole night talking to it as a solution to the problems he's having. And then I imagined a skeptic saying, what a load of rubbish, The moon is a great chunk of rock, a billion miles away out there, Women, women are in your life, that sort of thing. Yeah. There's no possible connection between those two. And yeah, so what's the point of talking to the moon when you want to? Now, what I say is that actually we're told that when we experience something, we're really experiencing a virtual experience that the brain has created. When you reach out to pick up a rock and you see it and you pick it up and you feel its weight and everything, and you drop it and it goes thump and you can hear it. Um, it's so vivid, it feels as though your consciousness is actually reaching out and touching that rock. What else could it be? It's so real, that feeling. But actually, all that comes into the brain is electrical signals from your fingers, from the muscles as you reach out. You can feel that happening. Your fingers as you touch it. When you drop it, it goes thump, and your ears pick up the sound. Your eyes see it happening. It's all perfectly orchestrated together, but all that came into the brain is electrical signals. It didn't really touch anything. and yet it gives you this experience that's absolutely real and vivid. So when the person says, "Oh, the rubbish, the moon is right out there, millions of miles away, and it's made of rock," everything he knows about the moon is in his brain. Every time he's looked at the moon, the actual experience happens in his brain. His whole knowledge and experience of the moon is modeled in his brain. Now, all the women he's known in his life, from his mother who held him to girlfriends to sisters, all the women were only experienced in his brain. So the idea that there's no connection between them, I think is crazy.
Hmm.
Would you have a computer where every time a new experience came, it had to fire up a new processor, air gapped from all the others? Nonsense. There must be some sharing of brain cells and all that. So really the miracle is how does the brain manage to keep all these things separate? That's the miracle. Whereas I would say logically, it's a mush of connections and meanings. That's
Hmm.
now I added an addendum to that. I said, how do I know about the electric signals going to the brain? Oh, well, that's because centuries of scientific research into well documented, agreed scientific research tells us that's what's happening. But I said the scientists who discovered that were actually only experiencing a model of it in their own brain themselves. So how do we know that's really what's true? You know, maybe the brain is telling them what it wants them to believe.
Hmm.
Perhaps that's what's happening all along. So yeah, uh, the puzzle that I address to this thing is if it feels so real, is it because actually the brain has managed to make a model of what is really out there? Or has the brain given us a model which it evolved in order to help our survival?
Hmm.
And you see, um, I said, my cat's outside, and a dog comes and goes woof, and the cat jumps into the tree. Now, the cat is being a materialist. It doesn't ask the tree permission to jump into it. It doesn't reach out to touch the dog to see if dog to see if it's an illusion. As far as it's concerned, it's a material reality. Dog danger, tree safety, leap into it. So the cat's brain is being given a materialist view of the universe. I say actually any brain does that. A butterfly lands on a flower and he expects it to be a solid object and maybe have honey in it. It's so is the brain just giving us a simplified thing to work on, a sort of desktop to work on, um, and therefore makes sure that there isn't much magic because magic's disturbing and you wouldn't be able to predict things. Maybe it just gives us a very simple model of reality, um, because that's what it's evolved to do. And so if the person sees a connection between women and the moon, it isn't that they've invented something which is nonsense. They've actually gone below the surface of that reality and are seeing connections which are there like anything. But it's usually life is simpler if you can separate women from the moon. You could, yeah, life is simpler if you do that. And so perhaps the whole thing of this sort of material reality is actually what we need in order to get on with our lives. And if you start peeling back that and seeing the meanings, you are making life more interesting.
Hmm.
Now, the interesting thing to me, you see, is that in our society, we have conquered nature to such a big extent, not completely, but uh, we have air conditioning, we have, remedies and all that sort of thing. We drive around in cars. And I think that people, to some extent, uh, find that boring. Why do they spend so much time watching movies of disasters, of car crashes, of shootouts, of people killing, of wars and all that. It's actually for, I don't know, thousands of years, even millions of years, humankind evolved through constant battles and everything. Um, Now we've got to the stage where life is just a bit too predictable,
Hmm.
a bit too ordinary. You have a problem, you can look on Google and find the solution, things like that. And I think people feel a bit dissatisfied. And I think that this opening up to bigger experience, this beginning to question that rigid materialist model, is just opening the door to a whole new world, if you like, um, uh, where having made things too safe. Oh yeah, I just as a flashback. I remember a thing on BBC Radio where they had a serious discussion about crazy modern new age pagan ideas and all that. And one of the bishops said, there's this Gnostic idea going around, that we can all become gods. We have it in us, and he says that's a very dangerous idea. And my reaction was, yippee, we need dangerous ideas. The world is so safe. We
Yeah.
need really dangerous ideas to get excited about everything. So I think that uh, there's, yes, chaos magic in a way is very rational and sensible, but it opens the door to excitingly dangerous discoveries. And I think that's rather important. I think it's something that the world needs. And at present, the media are digging their heels in and sort of saying, oh, this is post truth and we need to stamp out this sort of craziness and stuff, the other. The world's going to the dogs. And I'm only 30% sure they're right. The rest of me thinks, no, actually, something very interesting is happening here. And I hope it works out well.
Yeah. It makes me think, okay, magic. So we've got chaos. I think we've been exploring chaos a bit. Um, Magic, because it seems to me with this model of like going into the source code or going below the desktop via magic and looking at the different beliefs and worldviews that help shape our evolutionary necessary kind of picture and models to simplify. Uh, there might be something because a lot of the definition, maybe I could ask you to define magic, but a lot of the definitions I've heard talk about change, right? It's about like playing or change or
Yes, yes.
and it feels to me that change isn't necessarily safe. Like predictability, that has a association with sameness. And we talk about like I think the boring world, like the liberal world or whatever, they sometimes say the end of history. Like we don't want any more history.
Mm,
And like we know what it'll be. There'll be in America, there'll be Democrats, there'll be Republicans. We'll go back and forth, and we'll basically do that, and it'll always be like that. And that's kind of, even though it's suboptimal, it's kind of safe.
mm,
But things are changing. Obviously, we're getting all kinds of wild shit is happening.
mm.
Um, and I don't know. Can you riff on change or like having fun with
Yeah,
change or do you see
yeah,
magic in change? Like, how do you why change basically?
yeah. Um, I know that uh, I tend to see magic as sort of the path from science towards art. Um, you know, Science seems to be able to do everything, and then you find the things that don't actually seem to work very well. And I parody this. I picture, a group of male students sharing a lodging, and they've become very rational. They've read the psychology, they've read up the books, they read Women Are from Mars and from Men Are from Mars, Women from everything like that. So they think they know everything, but they can't get off with the right girls, you see. So um, somehow all their knowledge and everything they've learned and all that sort of thing, all their skills they've learned, don't work quite well in the real human world. Now, um, I'd say one of the people in that house joins a pagan group where there's a lovely mixture of men and women, boys and girls, and and his life takes off. He really enjoys it. Other people are very scornful, oh, that's mumbo jumbo, that's rubbish. But they will buy a T-shirt with a sort of Armani logo on it, or I don't know what the latest, you know, sort of latest fashion garment logo is. And um, but why? Because the adverts suggested that if you want to be cool and mix with the right women, you get this logo on your t-shirt, t-shirt with this logo on. If they know you've bought a whatever it is, Dolce and Gabbana, whatever it is, you'll be cool. Um, Now, actually, what they bought is a talisman to attract women. Um, it hasn't. They didn't use the word talisman. The advertisers didn't say this is a talisman. They didn't even say this is going to attract women. They just showed a guy walking through and all the women turning and looking at a little movie. In other words, sort of they dropped this idea into their mind that um, the way to be successful with women is to wear this sort of T-shirt or these sneakers or whatever. Um, so. Uh, what am I saying is that people want magic to make changes, um, and even if they don't admit it, they will actually do magic. You know, they'll buy the talismanic T-shirt, or uh, if they're told that it's really cool to talk about a certain new book or a new group or something, um, they will try that out. They'll talk about it, and wow, everyone thinks they're very cool and everything like that. So really, they're using an incantation in that case.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't talk about where the latest author is or something. Um, so people do it to make change. Now, if I go back to that example of the person who joins the pagan group, there is a change because now he's sort of popular with a lot of new people, and his life's taken off. But he's also getting a whole fresh way of looking at the world. The world is sort of coming to life for him. Um, he's seeing new meanings and new things like that, and that is, um, to me, that's as important bit of magic as actually making changes. I know that I've spoken uh, from time to time. I've given talks to perhaps a group of pagans, and I say, you know, as time passes, I'm not actually doing so much magic. Um, the rituals I do now are more likely to be like celebrating the seasons rituals, and saluting the moon or something like that. And I always see in the audience, particularly the older people, nodding their heads. And what you're doing is you're going from trying to change life to what you want it to
Mm.
celebrating life as it is.
Hmm.
I think that is how magic tends to mature in people. They find that, you see, if you can change life to what you want, um, in a way you've limited it. I remember a friend of my brother's, way back in the 70s, I think it was, made a lot of money. He hit on a money making scheme and he made a fortune. And he moved to this expensive flat on the seafront of Brighton, beautiful flat with sea view. And he got decorators to come in and, produce a sort of home and county masterpiece um, room. And I went up there and thought, wow, this is like something out of a magazine. It's absolutely perfect. Brand new furniture, brand new everything, shining. And I thought that was wonderful. And I thought, what will it look like in 12 years' time? People say, it's lovely, but it's terribly 1970, isn't it? Because what had happened, that room was a snapshot of his taste at one moment in time. He had the power to make the world just what he wanted. But unless he's creative and evolves it, he's actually living in a prison that he made at that moment in time, a prison of his taste at that time. So if you could wave your wand and you've got a Rolls Royce outside, wave your wand and you've got £1 million in your bank account, wave your wand and the most delicious meals that you've got a chef that serves you the most perfect food and all that. Um, that's a rather wonderful thing. But 10 years' time, when you've still got the chef delivering perfect meals, you've still got the Rolls Royce, or now it's a Lamborghini or whatever. Um, what point do you begin to feel I'm trapped in the world I've created for myself?
Mm,
Whereas if instead you do some of the things we've been talking about, where you're constantly seeing new things in the world, you're seeing new beauty there, you're seeing new meanings there. Um, in a way, you're experiencing life rather than making it happen. And there's a lot of beauty in that, to experience things rather than be always the one that makes them happen. So um, I I have a lot of respect for the results magicians, and I think it's very interesting what they're doing. But just particularly in my old age, I would say, don't forget there's also value in the experiences that you get when you look at them magically. You know,
mm.
the meanings you get, the learnings you get, and things like that. And that, of course, applies as we went how we started. That applies to the bad things as well as the good things. You know, look back in your life and say, really, what were the things that shaped me? And there may be some of the bad things that happened. Yeah, it's that fresh appreciation of life. I would say um, is, I think, an important part of magic.
Oh, interesting. Fascinating. Okay, I'm like really moved. I wonder if I want to ask you if you'd play a game based on this last thing, and with your permission.
Yeah,
Before we play, I'll ask your permission. So these are the rules of
yeah,
the
that's
game.
it. Mm,
So the rules of the game would be that in this game, you would play the role of like the archetype of the mentor, like the Gandalf or the Dumbledore, and
right.
then
Yeah.
and
Mm,
like the wise old man archetype,
mm,
wise teacher archetype. And that would be your role. And my role would be like the eager, innocent student who
mm,
wants to make things happen in the world, but maybe is a bit green.
mm.
And then I want to come to in the game, I want to like come to you with asking for advice. So but
Yes.
before I put you in that role, I want to like get your consent and permission. Like, how do you feel
Yeah,
about
yeah.
playing?
Okay, we'll try. Try
Okay.
it. That's it.
Okay.
I
So
might say, cut that bit, cut that bit. If it
okay, okay.
doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Uncle Ramsey, I'm coming to you for advice. And
Mm,
I hear what you're saying about the experience in the world, but there's two things I want to make happen right now. And I want them desperately. Oh, I see some balloons happening. I don't know if you see that.
oh,
I don't know what that was about. But
yeah.
there's two things I desperately want in the world. I want we've talked I feel like you've been giving me dating advice.
Mm,
So I want a lover, that is emotionally available and there's passion and yeah, I want a lover. So I want to make that happen. And I've recently got a pentacle of Venus to try to help me with that.
mm,
So we've got that. And I also want less war in the world. Like I'm seeing all this war
mm,
and every season that goes by, it seems like there's more war going. And
mm,
so like from my results magic perspective, I want a lover and I want less war in my community.
mm.
What should I do?
Well, let's start with the lover.
Okay.
Try to warn next. Um, Now, what I would ask is, you've said you want a word, a lover,
Yeah, I want a
but
word.
actually you want an experience, don't you?
Yeah.
So, how do you know what you really want? Have you ever had that sort of experience? In fact, have you had lovers in the past, or partial lovers? If you say, that's what I want now, that's what I want to recreate. For example, it might be the relationship with your mother, so close, so meaningful.
Mm,
What you're actually saying is, I would like that sort of relationship with a woman that I admire. So I would ask you to clarify what you really want rather than just saying the word a lover.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
think it's a combination. I think, now that I'm thinking of it, I like romantic comedies and I also
mm,
like fairy tales.
mm,
So I think, yeah, there's a combination of partial past lovers and then also like a fantasy
mm,
of like how to lose a guy in 10 days or something like some movie
mm.
that I've
Okay.
seen as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'd say that you use the word fairy tales and you use the word fantasy.
Yeah.
So actually, you're wanting something which you see as a bit of a fantasy. Um,
Mm.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that because, the world we're given can be a bit predictable and boring. So if you want something fanciful, I would say create it through play acting and fancy. Um, Now, so, dress up as the Latin lover or something like that. Um, Go into a bar swaggering in. Now, why don't you do that? Because you feel it's stupid, and oh my God, how corny. But if you're going for a fantasy, be a fantasy.
Mhm.
Um, so the magic there is fake it till you make it.
Mhm.
You know, wear the Gucci T-shirt or whatever like that. Swagger in, have the coolest things to say, the best records or whatever. Something. Yeah. So I'd say play act, because what you're actually asking for is a play act, which you think is very lovely,
Yeah.
and it's got quite a good chance of working.
Mm.
And then the slight danger then as it works, say you find, and you're having a wonderful time, is remember that it's something that you made happen.
Mm.
And so don't let yourself think, oh my God, I really am the perfect lover and all that type of thing, because
Right.
probably it'll break up then. So in other words, always keep your, what's the word, agency in it,
Mhm.
and maybe even be true to the other person. Because it's very nice for two people to say, yeah, actually I was play acting a bit when I met you. Let's do it regularly. Let's go. Let's have the most crazy dates pretending we never met before. I don't think. Yeah, that's it. Anyway. Sort of, keep the thing going. That's it.
So
Mm,
maybe, yeah, maybe what I could do is admit early to the
mm,
person, like, hey, like I did a spell to Venus and I took my Armani shirt and I doused it in rose water and I did it on the Friday morning and
mm,
I summoned you, my lover. And I just want to let you know I'm just kind of a normal working class dude.
mm,
So before we get into this, you should probably know that. Now, but we should regularly worship the goddess and
mm.
make this a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Uh,
Now that's interesting. Yes, because um, uh, only you in that position would know when it's the right time to say that.
yeah.
And again, it's this question of treat them as a complete human being and empathize. If she's a bit insecure, that might be very damning. Oh my God, I'm something he called up. Ugh. It's creepy. So when the relationship is going well, you can sense when it's going to add value by saying that. You
Yeah.
know, she's sort of saying, "Oh, I wish magic worked." And you said, "Well, actually, do you know how I met you? Bring it up or something." Yeah, it's sort of make it fit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's brilliant. Maybe, yeah, I think I don't know if you're busy, but when you're ready to write a new book or something, I think Uncle Ramsey's Guide to Sex and Romance would be a good addition to your catalog.
Okay. Yeah.
Just unsolicited advice, sorry.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
finding it helpful.
Mm, mm.
And what about this war thing? What
Oh,
about
yes, yes.
it's a bit more
Now,
heavy?
I did write a piece uh, in the book "What I Did in My Holidays," which is a collection of
Uh-huh.
essays. And there's one piece called Why We Love War. Now, I'll try and remember what I said in it. Um, uh, I think one of the things I said was that I described a man walking down a dingy street at night where there aren't many street lights. He's parked his car and he's walking down it, and he's scared. It's a dangerous place. So what does he do? He looks around. He makes sure he parks under a light, a lamppost, because there's light there.
Yeah.
Um, he walks rather cautiously down the middle of the street because he knows people might leap out from either side. And so he's walking very nervously down, and he's walking rather quickly because he wants to get it over with and all that. Um, and he's in, he's really frightened. And I said, another man comes, parks, does exactly the same as him. He, he's confident. He parks the car under a lamppost, not because he's terrified of being in the dark, but because he knows it's a sensible thing to do in a dangerous place. You park under a lamppost. Right. He walks down the center of the road because, well, um, he's James Bond. He knows you don't do stupid things like walking down past alleyways, things like that. Um, he walks rather confidently. He knows what he's doing and all that. Um, Now, I say the two people actually do exactly the same thing.
Mm.
The difference is one is doing it in terror, frightened, that sort of thing. The other's thinking, "Hey, I'm cool. I'm a secret agent. I know the right things to do. I'll walk down there." That sort of thing. And uh, so, what was the point I was making? It's um, there's a lot of fantasy about danger and excitement. Um, and after the Second World War, when I was brought up, cities had been bombed to shreds. They were in a terrible mess. And there was a huge move towards we won't do that again. And although Winston Churchill had been a sort of hero who had defended, got Britain defending itself against the German invasion, things like that. Uh, Although he was an absolute hero in the eyes of people, his party was voted out.
Right.
They called in a socialist government, and it was a very good socialist government. Um, Britain was impoverished. I was brought up with food rationing. I had to go as a little boy, I had to go and have my little ration of orange juice, concentrated orange juice for the week, and maybe given one or two sweets, which I had to spin out. Food rationing, dried eggs, all sorts of horrible stuff. And but they set up this national health system. And the thing was that national health is now a bit of a mess. It's a constant political football, and all that. And the people are trying to close it down and go commercial. But at that stage in the 50s, we were really proud of it. And people would tell stories about, you know, did you hear about the American woman who was going to have a baby? And she came to Britain because the National Health Service was so good. She knew she would get better treatment with her baby here. That, wow, we may be poor, we may be bombed out, we may be useless, and but we've got a national health. So there was sort of great pride in everything like that. Now, I'm just aware of how that has gone to tatters,
Mm.
and Britain is in a very sad state as far as I'm concerned. I'm not living there at present, but what I hear and what people say. And I think there's a sort of comes a point where people would say anything is better than this. And they wouldn't like to say that consciously because they know that war is horrific. They've seen things like that. But something in them says anything would be better than this.
Yes.
I want change. Um, and the thing is that how much that can bubble up from the unconscious and actually change people's behavior is is a worrying thing. Um, Now, what is the remedy that spiritual people would say? They say it's love.
Yeah.
Unless you can love all mankind, you know, unless you can radiate out, there's a meditation, a Buddhist meditation. You sit and you allow yourself to love yourself, which for some people is quite difficult in itself. So really feel that you love yourself. Then you spread it out to your immediate family and friends and all that. Get that feeling. Yes, yes, I really feel myself loving them. Then put it out to your country or whatever, and then put it out, out and out until you're embracing the whole world and this love which you're feeling, really feeling in your heart. Now, uh, if I if I try to do that to Putin, it isn't that easy. I find myself being very, very angry with what he's doing to Russia. Um, Now, when that war started, one thing that annoyed me is how quickly people spoke about what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. Now, that was wrong for me because I knew that in Russia, probably nearly half the people didn't want to go and kill Ukrainians because they'd been living together. They knew Ukrainians, they had Ukrainian pop stars they liked, things like that. So they wouldn't actually want to go and kill Ukrainians. But they've been told it has to happen. They've been told you must do it. So it annoyed me when people said what Russians are doing, because really it's only maybe a majority, but only certain Russians are doing that. Now, um, what's the difference here? The Russians I could identify with are those who don't really want to go to war, but they're forced to do it. And I feel sorry for them. What a terrible thing to have to kill people. And then there are those who really believe what Putin says. Now, what he's saying is that Ukraine, which was really a part of Russia, has gone bad.
Hmm.
They've become Nazis. They want to destroy the Soviet, destroy Russia because of the Soviet Union, and they really believe that. Now, what I thought to myself is what if I really believed? I'm going back to England now. I lived on the borders of Wales or close to Wales in Gloucestershire. What if I really believed that Welsh people had turned into fascists and are trying to destroy England? If I really believe that, how might I behave?
Hmm.
I might do terrible things. I might sort of join a vigilante group and go around trying to kill Welsh people or something. If I really believe that. So I began to feel sorry for those people. I think they're deluded, but the poor things, they really believe that. You know, what do I expect of them? So I was able to uh, get a bit closer to that of loving them. I could see that, I felt sorry for them. I felt empathy. If you
Hmm.
believe that, what a horrible thing. What a horrible belief to be. Who gave them that belief? Well, it's Putin gave them that belief. Now, so my anger's contracted a bit, you see. And I thought, Putin really seems to believe that he's the savior of Russia. He's got a god. Well, Hitler thought the same about Germany, didn't he? And he went balmy. And I think Putin's going a bit balmy myself. But if you really believe that you're a savior, how could you carry that belief in face of the reality of the damage you're doing and all that sort of thing? You can only believe that if you're a bit crazy. So I got closer to empathizing with him. I think poor chap, he's deluded and he's deluding his people, a lot of them, and nothing good can come of this. So I can't say that I was the perfect Buddhist and got to the stage where I could love the whole world. But I found myself looking at people that made me very angry indeed and beginning to see how, if you have a delusion, if you see the world wrong, your behavior can be terrible,
Hmm.
you know. So, um, yeah. So I think that if people thought a bit more psychologically, as soon as they think politically, you take sides. And the difference to me is in the Cold War, um, there was this thing of Russians versus the West and the axis of evil, Russia and China and other communist states. Um, and you'll get in the news, the Russians are building a new sort of nuclear weapon or something like that. And people would say, that's appalling, it shows how evil they are. They just want to conquer the world. Haven't you read their manifestos? They're trying to conquer the world. And I would say, well, actually, perhaps it's because they're frightened. They could be frightened of us. Therefore, they think they've got to build. Oh, you're just making excuses for them. The reason they're doing it is because they're blasted commie bastards. That's why they want to build these things. They want to take over the world. You're just making excuses saying they're frightened. And my answer was, you're the one making excuses. Because if they are commie bastards and the thing that commie bastards do is make nuclear weapons, they're only being true to themselves. You know, you're letting them off the hook. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just being commie bastards. That's what commie bastards do. Whereas I'm saying, actually, I think they're scared. I'm giving them more responsibility. They're scared, and that's why they're doing this. So if we could somehow not scare them as much,
Hmm.
um, they might not do it. So I think it's sort of looking psychologically, be less inclined to step into the um, black and white political view, good, bad, um, and recognize that something is happening here, which is a trick. Because think of nasty Russians and know that actually a lot of them are very lovable people who don't really like what's going on or that sort of thing. Not all of them, maybe a minority, but there are plenty like that. That there isn't this sort of sharp distinction between good and bad. And that was one of my books, The Good, the Bad, the Funny, where I looked at, in
Oh.
fact, the whole thing is a trick.
Hmm.
The trickster uh, uh, takes a spectrum like between right and left thinking, whereas actually it's an illusion because there are all sorts of opinions all the way down. There's 50 million opinions in there. Some people are rather right wing in their economics, but they're quite left wing in their family upbringing and vice versa and all that. It's a very mixed thing. But people get split as the right wing versus the left wing. And so I think that you can't do anything very easily about it because it's so ingrained in our thinking. But um, applying the sort of thinking I've been experimenting with, if it could somehow become more general, I think that could help. Um, that uh, people realize that when people are behaving their worst, it's very often because they're scared.
Hmm.
Then you have to say, what are they scared of? Is it me? Is it us? Some Russians really are scared that NATO is trying to take them over and humiliate them and so on and so forth. Well, whether it's true or not, if you have that fear, you can't expect people to behave very well if they've got that fear. So it's just sort of beginning to, it contributes to having an understanding. Like, you've got an old bit of machinery that's behaving very badly, isn't working. You put a few drops of oil, that might be the beginning of a healing or something like that. I can't really offer more than that, but I think it's a direction that we need to go. And I don't think we'll do it fast enough to really solve our immediate problem.
Hmm.
But if society could move towards that sort of understanding of its own nature, uh, it would be healing.
Hmm. Thanks, Ramsey. I wonder now if I could contextualize. I think what you said there was extremely profound, and I'm seeing two elements of it, which is the first element, which is the uh excitement of war, like the black and white thinking and how ingrained it is in us. And so
Mm,
we could work with that actually and like turn towards it and view it
mm,
like demonically and in the good way and negotiate with it. And then there's the thing you've been talking about throughout the interview, which is empathy in this way to like, instead of demonizing Putin or the Russian people or the
mm,
Israeli people or the Palestinian people,
mm,
seeing how we could, what would make us act like the person we don't like and understand them from that empathetic level. So the first, well, and then I want to contextualize that reflection by saying the name of this podcast is Peace Now, which is supposed to be a kind of joke or surreal because it's peace in the sense that everything is okay, but then I want it now, like give it to me now. I need it. And it's more like
yeah. Yes.
desperate. Um,
Mm,
and I view that contradiction or that tension as potentially generative. Just
mm,
like I think I started the project being very pro love,
mm,
but I think there's a secret dichotomy and a hidden unconscious hatred of power in that. And I think like Martin Luther King, who I mentioned earlier, had this very beautiful idea that love and power need to dance together and they need to support each other. And one
yeah.
isn't subservient to the other. They're equal partners for
Mm,
him. And I think that's a very interesting idea. And so there's this American novelist, Cormac McCarthy, who shares this very in the Blood Meridian, which is an absolutely violent exciting novel in the Texas before Texas was America. It's just very like wild land, and there's a lot of fighting going on between native people and settlers. And one of the quotes there is "War is God," is
oh yeah.
what he says there, and then that's quoting a Greek. A Heraclitus, I think, who says something like, I'm butchering this, but it's like, war is the father and mother of all. It makes gods gods and kings kings. And he's saying that
Mm, yeah.
change, and war is synonymous with change because in the,
Mm,
war would come in and break down your cosmology, like your cosmology was the king was God. And then a new king comes in and kills God. So obviously he's God or their
yeah.
God. And
Mm,
it changed historically, according to this view, changes things. And I think,
mm,
yeah, like you're saying in your first reflection, is people feel desperate in England. It's like, yeah, maybe a little war would be nice. Let's fight with the Germans again so we can maybe
yeah.
get something different. And that might
Yeah.
feel unconscious, but I think it's kind of a good
Mm,
point. And so, like, I'm thinking in my head now is like maybe like play is God or something, or it's like we need to have a mechanism
mm,
to not be bored um,
yes.
and
Yeah.
to actually change things
Mm,
and not get stuck. And
mm,
how could we potentially do that with, if peace is going to lead to stagnation,
mm,
peace won't last very long because humans are going to want to change.
yeah. Yeah. I remember in the I think it was the 70s probably. Uh um there was it was perhaps getting towards 80 when England was beginning to get a bit troubled, things began to crack up a bit. And the model of perfection was Scandinavia. Sweden had a really good government. They really got their socialism working well. There was very little inequality, and the king and queen would go to work on bicycles or something like that. I can't remember if I got it exactly right, but it's sort of Sweden was heaven. And what did the, the conventional thing that the journalists would say, the media was, um, who the hell would want to live in Sweden? How boring, Um, and I only once went to Sweden. I thought it was amazing. I loved it. I could be very happy there, but it was sort of, oh, it's boring. Okay, they got low crime, but oh, how boring. And and I thought, isn't that ridiculous? Um, Firstly, I don't think they really meant it. I think if they went to Sweden, they would probably love it. Um, but the convention that you feel you have to say that. to be cool. I thought, oh God, the press, honestly. I like flushing them down a sewer, show them what real life is like if they like that. Anyway, so there is that sort of thing that, um, uh, yeah, and there are jokes along those lines. Uh, I remember a joke about, someone who dies, and is he going to go to heaven or hell, And he comes around on a cruise ship with a gorgeous women all tanned around him, and sort of, and the butler comes along and offers him food and all that sort of thing. You think, wow, God, I made it. I've got to heaven. This is great. And it goes on, and day after day after day, perfect weather, perfect women, perfect food, and on and on and on and on. And he begins to get bored with it. He gets fed up, and he gets really angry. He said, God, this place is hell. And the butler says, yes, you're right.
Wow.
So, um, so definitely we've evolved to deal with trouble. Um, and so, uh, you see, state the world as in. We got a glimpse of what happened when COVID attacked us. Just for a very short time, countries as far away as Russia, China, America were cooperating just for a short time until they started getting greedy and say, we want our vaccine, we're not giving it to you. But for a moment, it was agreed around the world to ban flights, things like
Mm.
that. Agreements which normally, if you tried to do them in ordinary circumstances, people would argue for years and not do it. But so I realized that if we had an attack from outer space, like the War of the Worlds, humanity would become utterly united in a flash. We've got a common enemy.
Mm.
And you could say during the stability in the what do they call it, the Cold War, was that America had a real genuine enemy that they could they could unite against, and so what is Putin doing? He's creating a real enemy to justify what he's doing. NATO, everything is NATO trying to. So it's a formula for uniting people is to find some common enemy. Um, and if if something like COVID or invasions from outer space could come along, people would be united. And the question of for how long, before the squabbling starts again. But it's interesting because it does show certain things can happen, whereas it's very easy to believe they will never happen. They never can. Um, so I think that's yeah,
It's interesting. Yeah, this how to incorporate this kind of engine or energy behind the enemy and the uniting. It seems like we need an other to unite against, like the scapegoat, and then how to love thy enemy while still fighting them and getting the creator.
yeah,
Like maybe it should be a game, you know?
yeah. Well, you just said the right word because I'm going to say who manages this, and it's sport.
Yeah,
Um, you know, Eng South Africa playing rugby against New Zealand. You know, who are the worst people in the world? New Zealanders. We hate them.
yeah,
Despise them and what sort of thing. And we win. You know, weren't they great players? Didn't they give us a fantastic game? Um, oh, they're really great, but we're a bit better. That sort of thing.
yeah.
So
There's a respect.
I think yes, that's it. Respect. It's recognizing what the other people did well. It's part of it, I think. And so I think you're dead right. That is this, and you see, in a way, chaos magic with its playing with ideas is encouraging us towards that. You know, um, perhaps a couple that are getting a bit bored and into rut with each other, they might say, okay, next week, they're both agnostics. It's all very placid and everything like that. Next week, I'm going to be a born again Christian. you be a Satanist. We're going to live together, the born again Christian and Satanists. Sort of, bring the play back, um, opposition as play or something like that. Um, chaos magic, I think, uh, could give people
Hmm.
ideas to play with, alternative ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and even with like augmented reality now, like I wonder if one day we could like have war and even the violence of it
Mm,
and have the stakes, say like, hey, we're gonna fight and we're gonna
yeah.
say like this land is up for grabs and we're gonna
Mm,
have a war, but no one's gonna die. I think that would be like kind of, I mean, maybe this is just science fiction or
yeah.
something, but I think it's an interesting
No,
idea.
I think actually that's interesting. You see, because the one snag is you said no one's going to die. You
Mhm.
do want some sort of penalty or
A
something like
loss,
that.
yeah,
So, for instance, if it's points or
yeah.
it's money or something, so that you're fighting for something. Um, but yeah, I think that would be interesting. Um,
I like how they do it in the Olympics too and the World Cup
mm,
because it's honor, right? But
mm,
it's a lot of time. So like the fact that it's every 4 years
oh
means that you
yes,
don't get a shot at it very often, and it becomes like very meaningful.
yes,
Um,
yes.
and you can only
Yeah,
play
that's
many
true.
times.
If it was every month, people would
Who
stop
cares?
watching it like that. Yeah, it builds
Yeah,
up to it. Yeah,
it's like
and
if
it's
te
interesting to think how many years after a war before people start getting warlike again. It's a longer time, but it's because of so much damage is being done. But um, you might do some research to sort of
the
how
cycles.
long can people stand peace?
It
Yeah.
probably has to do with the cycle of Mars, I bet.
Oh yeah, yes. 2 year cycle.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
maybe like every 20 Mars cycles, there's an explosion or something.
Yes,
We
yes, that's
could
it.
say in America, like one thing we always worry about is Texas seceding. And you could
Mm.
say like every 25 years, Texas could send its best football team and say, hey, if you can beat the whole all stars of all of America
Mm.
once every 20 years, you know, you can
Oh,
secede. But
yes,
if
yes.
you lose, you have to stay for the next 25 years.
Yeah. Now that's good. Yes, that's it. Because it really taps into the incentive that
Mm,
does. So, like as I say, can't just say no one gets killed. You've got to have something.
yeah.
So this really taps into the incentive, and it lightens it
Mm,
a bit because the whole thing of the other people being evil, you know, trying to trap us and so the other becomes the other people not being quite as good as us, which
yeah.
is a much more gentle consideration than they're trying to destroy us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll work on that. The two things I'm running, I do have political aspirations, I have to admit.
Mm.
And the first thing I want to do is I want to abolish universal time. I think that was a massive mistake.
All right. That's like, I mean, me saying I'm GMT -2 and you're whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
think
what?
we should just kind of meet up, just be like, hey, around morning time, jump on Zoom and we'll talk and
Oh
uh,
yes, yeah.
yeah, have no time and be more qualitative. And I think it would,
Do you know? I thought it was very interesting why time became standardized.
is it railroad?
Yeah,
Yeah.
railroad. That was it. In Britain, that uh, in Britain it used to be each town would set its time by the sun. So they're all a bit different, that sort of thing. But when you try to have a railway arriving at a certain time, they realized you had to standardize, and
Mhm.
so you had to have a central time which went out. And so I suppose that went out around the world from there. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and in my system, we'll still have trains and planes, but it'll be more like you show up and they say, well, we're going to leave around morning time. And about when everyone gets there, you'll leave. So it'll slow things down a lot, but it will
Yes, yes, that's
make
it. Yeah.
make things a bit more serendipitous. And yeah, it's gaining popularity,
Oh,
but
yeah.
there's still a lot of skepticism, at
Oh,
least in
yes.
America.
it's like the jokes that the English people used to make about Irish people.
Hmm.
You know,
Maybe that's why.
what was it? They have this expression, you know, sort of what's it? Um, well, in South Africa, the equivalent thing is if you ask a South African to do something and he says, "I'll do it just now," that sounds very immediate, doesn't it? But just now means I'll do it sometime. Um, you have to say, "Will you do it now? Now?" And then
Not.
they'll do it fairly soon. um, well, yeah, that's it. And uh, yeah, yes,
Yeah, so the adding to the platform will be there will be an abolish of war, but there'll be an increase in competition.
mm, yes,
And
yeah, yes, yeah. We went to war. We got all our guns ready, went along, and they weren't there. I mean, you know, what the hell? What a waste of time.
Ramsey, I just have you've been very generous with your time. I just have one more thread I want to follow. If you have the time, do you have maybe
Oh
a little
gosh,
bit
yes,
more?
we've been got to four, so 2 hours we've been at it.
Not bad, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, blimey. So my back
Okay.
here hasn't actually failed.
Good, good, good. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about history. And so you're writing this chaos magic anthology right now. And so like could you contextualize chaos, like the history, like how do you see it? The genealogy of chaos magic and connecting that with maybe your journey as well. Because from what I understand, you've been there really since the beginning, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that I was an influence in it because uh, I published the description of Austin Spare's um, Book of Pleasure, where he describes his magical system, and it's very hard to read. And so I wrote a piece which sort of yeah, I did my best to explain it and to draw parallels with other things like Jacob Berman and what psychologists have said and things like that, and what the Tao Te King said. I drew these parallels to help people to understand it, and uh, and that was published in about 1970, I think it was. And I gather that for many people in the early chaos current, that was the first they really read about Austin Spare that made sense. Um, so that was one thing. Uh, the when I wrote SSOTBME, my first published book, I originally wrote it because Christopher McIntosh, who's a magical historian, said he wanted an essay on Western magic, and what he wanted was he was doing a book, sort of thing that was quite in demand in the mid 70s, a book about different religious and philosophical systems around the world, chapter on Buddhism and Hinduism and that sort of thing. And he said it'd be rather interesting to include uh, Western magic as one of the topics. So would I write about it?
Hmm.
So I wrote this article, and his book thing fell through. So I was left with this fairly long essay about magic. And um, one of my pupils had sort of decided, let's do some publishing together. And so what I did is I thought, well, I'll expand it a bit into a proper sort of little booklet about magic and then publish it myself. And that Gerald Suster, who was he was in with the proto chaos, people in Stoke Newington in London. That was like Pete Carroll, Charlie Brewster, and various other people. Uh, they were definitely a scene there. Um, Gerald Suster, when he saw my book, took it to them and told them about it.
Hmm.
And so I think it fed into they then, Pete moved up to the north of England with joined a lot of people around Leeds and that. And they were the people who really founded chaos magic as such. But I was aware that, I had fed into it quite a bit. And it was a very funny experience for me because I wrote Thundersqueak, the follow up, and I printed them myself, and I stuck the pages together. And I used to go around the country on my motorbike to alternative bookshops, sort of anarchist or whatever bookshops, and I'd give them a few copies for sale or return, and hope that they would sell them and all that. And I was getting a bit pissed off with it. I thought, this is really, I'm wasting my time. But then the Leeds University Occult Society invited me to come and give a talk. And so I sort of found out my way to Leeds. I went there, and the person began the talk by saying, "Tonight's speaker needs no introduction." I practically fainted. What? People actually read my stuff. I need no introduction. That's incredible. And it's because they were very much the sort of nexus of the chaos movement there, and Ray Sherwin and that. So they were very sort of um, so yes, I hadn't realized the extent I was actually had a readership, and people were really well, what I loved is that they were building on what I'd done. I didn't want people sort of disciples saying, "Oh, it says in Sosokbi, you've got to do this, you've got to do that." Um, People were taking it and running with it.
Hmm.
And another person did that actually. It was quite different. It was Tom Graves, who was an Australian occultist um, who'd written about dowsing. He wrote a book called something like Magical Technology, and it was actually based very much on my book.
Hmm.
And when I met him, he was very worried. Would I be cross that he'd stolen my ideas? I said, no, it's fantastic. It's like I lit a candle, and you came along and lit a candle from it. I love it. I don't own this idea. It's just me exploring and passing things on. So uh, yeah, so there was this movement growing, chaos magic, and I gave talks there, things like that. And yeah, now I at the time it was like a bit of a rebellion against Crowley, Thelema, not in a particularly negative sense, but it's just that the world had discovered Crowley, and so he was the ultimate. This is the real thing.
Hmm.
Um, and the chaos people really are to say, no, this is a developing thing. You know, um, he did a lot of good stuff, but we can go further. We can really um, explore the theory and whatever, sort of thing. But so that uh, for a while it had the reputation of being sort of anti everything that went before. But people fairly soon learned, if you're going to invent a ritual out of nowhere, it's not a bad idea to include quite a few traditional elements in it. It gives it more power. So it was a sort of mixture of that.
Ramsey, that's so interesting. You use the metaphor, the analogy, or maybe it's more than that, of lighting with our friend who wrote Magical Technology, Tom Graves. It was like a match or a torch.
Mm,
Um, and I very much, that's why I'm asking about the history question, because I view history as something alive. There's like a current or there's something being passed. And I'm very curious about that and following currents, like and following torch passings. And so that's why I was like, I'm curious about this. So this starts with you, like you needed no introduction. So this
mm.
leads a moment was important. And your work was inspiring, and especially the work on Spare.
Mm.
How did that happen for you? Like who gave you that torch? Like who gave you Spare? Like how did that come about?
Um, I was interested in magic from birth, really. I
Yeah.
mean, what kid isn't? It's
Yeah.
just most people learn to grow out of it. I didn't. Um, our 50s was a very rationalistic time. You know, People in 2000 thought they were skeptics. They were nothing compared with people in the 50s who I knew people who didn't even believe in hypnotism. Now
Hmm.
it's totally fake, something. Um, so uh, um, in my school, I got a scholarship to this boarding school, and it happened to have in the science library of all places, a huge glass cabinet full of books on magic
Hmm.
and alchemy. I mean, the real thing, Paracelsus. There were even actual manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, Arabic alchemy and things like that. You know, Agrippa, all these people. And I could take these books home with me. Um, no one sort of owned them. You know, there was cool stuff. And so I said, uh, well, magic was a non-topic. You know, don't say the word. If it doesn't exist, it's meaningless. I said, if magic just doesn't exist, it's nothing. Why so many books about it?
Good question.
Why are the people around the world who actually sort of, we're told about tribal people who do try and do magic? They say, oh, well, you see, because the big thing of the day was the Korean War brainwashing. They say, well, if you grow up amongst people who all believe in fairies and all that sort of nonsense, um, then you believe in them and you'll probably see them because you've been brainwashed into seeing it. And I gave an answer to that, which was really, I would say, it's the nascent mathematician in me, because mathematicians have a sense of symmetry. So I said, well, so I'm being brought up in a culture which says magic doesn't happen and there are no fairies. So if a fairy came into the room, I wouldn't see it, would I?
Mm.
Uh, so, um, as far as I was concerned, I'm being a pesky little kid, being stupid. But I thought, fair enough argument. If being told that magic exists means you see magic happening, if you're told magic doesn't exist, you wouldn't see it happening if it happened. And so that was um, quite fundamental, my thinking of SSOTBME, because magic has survived this very skeptical time because, in a very small way, I say, very small way, magic has survived because of people like Diane Fortune and W.E. Butler and Gareth Knight, who really taught it as a sort of extension of psychology,
Mhm.
inner path workings and things like that, and about growing psychologically. That was really what the message was. And so, and I respected that because if they hadn't done that, probably magic would have fizzled out altogether. No one would be crazy enough in the 50s to believe in magic or even think it was worth bothering about. But they sort of kept the flame going a little bit. Um, so what I was doing in Sosopmi, I was saying, yes, perhaps magic is about changing yourself and how you perceive the world, but don't underestimate what a difference that makes to what you actually experience. You know, and Gerald Suster, who was my link, became the link with her. Um, he he came up with this wonderful review phrase. He said, "Sosopmi is the book that put the magic back in magic."
Mm.
In other words, it's not just psychology. It's something which actually can make changes. You'll perceive, you will experience different things which you thought were impossible if you do magic. And so that was quite an important input because chaos magic began very much about results magic, you know, sigils, making things happen. And uh, I had contributed to that by saying, how you see the world will actually affect what you see.
Mm.
And so don't underestimate inner change
Mm.
for what it can do to the world.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so I want to get to the development of the sigil magic and the results magic, but just real quick, one follow-up question about the past. That library, that you is it around? Have you visited it? Like, where is it?
Um, what it was is there was a guy who wrote the Penguin History of Alchemy called
Huh?
Holm, and he was head of science at Clifton College in Bristol. He was the science master in charge of the science department. When he died, he bequeathed his collection to Clifton College. So they had this fantastic collection of books on magic and alchemy, particularly the alchemy side of it, but that included Theophrastus, Bombastus, Paracelsus, and all those people. And Thomas Vaughan, the Welsh
Yeah.
alchemist, who wrote really weird stuff. So fantastic collection. Now, um, I got so much from that library when I was there. When I left, um, I said, "What are you going to do with that library?" And the librarian said, I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. And I said, would you sell it? They said, well, yeah, I suppose for a reasonable amount of money. We'll have to get it valued. So they went to the valuers and discovered it was worth such a fortune that even though I thought I'd had a bit of money put aside, I couldn't know where I could buy it. So what they did is I think they needed to raise money, so they sold off a lot of the Arabic manuscripts and things like that, the very early stuff, because they realized, whereas things written even in Latin, the boys might get something from because they could learn Latin, and could read it, and certainly things like the translation of Cornelius Agrippa. So I think they kept a lot of it,
Hmm.
and I don't really know what percentage was the really ancient stuff which they sold off to raise money. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, I suppose sometime I might go back there and have a look.
Yeah.
It was I described as a real Harry Potter moment. Science library. There was I can't remember the order. I think it was like there was one floor was physics, another floor was chemistry, another floor was biology, and then on top there was this library.
Yeah.
So you go up. It wasn't a very old building, but it did have creaky wooden floors, and you went up through great wooden doors, and there was these glass cabinets all along one wall, and there was the rest of the science library, you know, and finding that not up there, so it was a Harry Potter moment,
Well,
finding
it's
this fantastic history.
yeah, like talking about the torch path, it's kind of an archetype in magic, right? Like finding ancient books that spark something, like whether it's like the Greek magical papyri or the Dead Sea Scrolls or even like the Necronomicon or something, like you find books and then it stimulates. Like so your journey was kind of like that. You went to the hidden library and found these books and they weren't where they're supposed to be. Like they're in this rationalistic, it was kind
Yes,
of like a wink at you, like, hey, check this out.
all for the next, I would say, the next 60 years. I had dreams from time to time, recurring dream. I'd go to some little village or something like that, and there'd be a bookshop. And I'd find the most fantastic occult section like that.
Yeah.
But one other thing about Austin Spare was I've only heard about him through Francis King wrote a book called Sexuality, Magic, and Perversion, and he had one chapter where he met, which was about Spare, and he said Spare's system is very sort of simple or sparse in a way, and it stands in relation to Western magic rather like Zen Buddhism does to Zen to Buddhism. Now, I was fascinated, with Eastern, with Japan and Zen and all sort of things. So that was like a red rag to the bull for me. I must find out about this person. So I asked Gerard York, who lived not far from me, and he was the person who kept the Crowley archive. He's the one who was responsible for the Crowley archive in the Warburg Institute. He made a magical vow that he would keep everything he had of Crowley. And I asked him about him, and he said, "Oh yes, I had a whole collection of Austin Spare stuff, but uh, I handed it over to a guy who wanted to write about him called Kenneth Grant, and
Uh-huh.
uh, he this was about 1970. He hasn't done anything with it yet. It was a shame. I would have liked to have given it to you, um, but he lent me the Book of Pleasure, and I found that so interesting that I went around all the bookshops, secondhand bookshops I could find, asking him, "Have you got anything of Austin Spare?" And I was able to collect most of his works, all his published works. I was able to collect just because they were around, and you know, people would sell them for sort of £8 or something like that. Um, and so I built up this collection, and that was what was used for the first collected works of Austin Osman Spare. It
Hmm.
was my books facsimiled into a book. So yeah, I was fascinated him early on, and I saw him, the two of them, Crowley and Spare, sort of complemented each other for me because Crowley, what was Crowley's magical system? Well, actually, he did everything. He was a Buddhist. He tried this, he tried that. He probably did sort of spiritualism or everything. He would have tried everything. And so eventually he sort of formed Thelema. And so you realize that he ended up with something like a system, but even that's quite spread, many elements of it. But Austin Spare had this very basic, simple idea about getting things down into the unconscious where they're effective. And so I thought that was very interesting. The one had a sort of a definite theory, the other had a huge expanse of exploration. And somehow the two of them, it worked well with me, that sort of putting it together.
It's so interesting. Yeah. And there's something about the historical context of Spare too, because it's around the time psychoanalysis is burgeoning, and it's kind of the opposite. I mean, it's very similar, but it's instead it's going into the unconscious instead of verbalizing the unconscious.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and yeah,
Dropping the messages in.
yeah, dropping messages in instead of like decoding them
Mm. Yeah.
in some way. I think I'm very interested in Spare for that reason. Okay, so fascinating. So rewind, fast forwarding a little bit. Where do you think the torch goes from the Leeds days to this like chaos magic torch? How do things develop for you and chaos magic?
The answer is I don't know.
Oh,
Since I moved to South Africa, I've been very out of touch.
oh,
Um, uh, when I was in England, even though I tended to be in the country, far away from other people, I would be enough in touch and would meet and chat with them and everything to have a feel for how things were developing. But in South Africa, I'm not a great one for social media and that. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, but all my real growth was through sitting around people's houses, or sitting in pubs and chatting and that sort of thing. Very much the personal contact. That's how I kept my finger on the pulse of what was happening.
hmm,
But I haven't had that for a very long time. So I'm actually quite curious. I really need other people to tell me how things are developing and where they're going. Um, all I have is well, I suppose the questions people ask me are a pointer to where
hmm.
things are going. But I would love to be back, sort of. It was wonderful, particularly the pagan, some little country cottage you would stay in, or you'd be sitting around a fire talking and that. And that was I really could sense the way things were going.
Hmm.
Um, I'm, uh, I'm a bit of a outside observer now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bit of a genealogist. Like they say in families, um, there's like one person who like I'm obsessed with mapping my family tree.
Mm.
And I noticed that in the different branches, there's like one cousin and we all connect but it's usually one obsession. And I feel like that's like kind of a thing I like doing. So I'm trying to map the development of chaos magic. And this has been like very, very
Yes,
helpful. When did you move
yes.
to South Africa, if you don't mind me asking? What?
I married a South African. I met
Oh,
her in England.
yeah.
Um, Fell in love in 2000. I never thought I was going to get married in my life, but I did. We married,
Yeah.
and I went to live with her in London for a few years. Must have been 5 years, yes, because we came to South Africa in 2005, and obviously we'd visited South Africa, and
Yeah.
the climate and everything was wonderful. It's very sort of Mediterranean climate around the Cape, and uh, so we all decided we would. I was never adapted very well to London because I was very much had been brought up in the country, and so uh, when I was in London, I had a car and two motorbikes because when you're in the country, you can't get rid of your means of transport. Whereas in London, having a car and two motorbikes is disastrous. You
Yeah.
always have to find places to put them, always getting fined for them being in the wrong place, that sort of thing. So yeah, and so it was lovely to come down to South Africa, and
Beautiful.
um, the country is to some extent is going to the dogs, but I don't know any country around the world that isn't going to the dogs at present. So I'm quite committed to it now.
Yeah, lovely, Ramsey. And I wanted to say thanks for this interview. We've been talking for a while now, and you've been really generous with your time. I do have just one final question, which is, how can we help you? Like, how can our audience, like, where can we go to, if we're interested in your work, where can we go? And then what are something you need help with that we can help with?
All right, gosh. Well, the thing that I stopped doing when I had my back problem, I do this YouTube. I got a YouTube channel, and when I think of things, I talk about them. And now people will be getting a bit worried because let me think. October, November, December, January, February, 5 months I haven't done anything. I've got a few things bottled up that I want to talk about, but I've been moving house, and so I haven't fully settled in. I got two computers on my desk because I don't know which one to get rid of. So things are very much up in the air, and they haven't settled yet. But I intend to continue with that because
Excellent.
I enjoy doing that. I enjoy sharing my ideas with people, and get a few comments back and things like that. The other thing is I've done quite a few interviews. Yours the first one I've done since I've had the problem, but they're always very interesting for me because you ask where is chaos magic going. I get a better idea from talking to you of where it
Hmm.
might be going, and people like you. So um, I value that a lot. Uh, it's very nice to share, particularly when where you do it, where it's a sort of an ongoing discussion. We move from one thing to the other and all that.
Yeah.
It tells me about what people are interested in and things like that. And I think it'll probably inspire me to do some more of my videos. I
Excellent.
do have a website, but I'm ashamed to say I don't know what to do with it. I should be writing little things and having a blog, but it's just one more thing to bother about,
Hmm.
Um, books. Um, Someone's asked me to do another collected works. I did. Um, I haven't done the first collected works, which early stuff. I did Blast Your Way to Megabucks, which was really about what I did in the 80s, that sort of thing. And then what I did in my holidays, which is collected works up to about 1996 or something like that. But I've written quite a lot of articles since then, enough to make quite a fat third lot of collected works. So I intend to do that.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I wrote this thing for the Pete Carroll's anthology of chaos magic, and yeah, cool.
Excellent. Yeah, maybe when you put out your third collected works, we can seduce you to come back on and discuss it. Um,
Certainly, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and yeah, I just will link Ramsey's YouTube and the website and
yeah.
the anthology.
Mm. What I remember the website is it sort of explains that I'm interested in exploring ideas and magic things like that, and I think I'll have to look and see. I think it's got links to each YouTube I do.
Oh,
That
good.
it's mentioned on there. They don't describe me or anything very much. I don't think so. Um, but I should really find some of my articles and put them into the blog. That would make it come alive again. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And yeah, just speaking from personal experience, we do anxiously, no pressure, but we love getting a Ramsey a Duke YouTube video. It's always a pleasure when we see those. So we'll be
All right. Oh yeah.
looking forward to that. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And thanks again to Ramsey. And
All
we'll
right.
see you next time.